атлетики, я без них уже никуда. Как защита моя.
Думаю, чтобы не отметелил.
Perhaps a controversial opinion, but I think that bodybuilding style training has been incredibly underutilized in Western weightlifting programs across the last few years, and I think that it's leaving results on the table. So what I want to do in this video is I want to break down some of the benefits that bodybuilding style training can bring to weightlifting results, as well as maybe some of the reasons that it hasn't been used, and then sort of moving on to some practical recommendations about ways that you can implement bodybuilding style training into your weightlifting program. So if we are talking potential benefits, then the first and foremost is that a bigger muscle is fundamentally a stronger muscle. We know from research that 50% of your maximal strength can be attributed to cross-sectional area. So basically just how big your muscle is. So by using bodybuilding techniques and hypertrophy work to get bigger muscles, especially around quads, erectors, lower back, hamstrings, glutes, you're going to really see improvements in your maximum strength potential for your weightlifting movements. And then another major benefit is that bodybuilding style training allows you to fill out your weight class. So some of the biggest issues that I see with beginner and early intermediate lifters is that they just don't have enough size to fill out their class. So it's really common to see, especially coming from sort of CrossFit circles or coming from that kind of background, lifters that are 6 foot tall, but trying to compete as an 81 kilogram lifter or an 89 kilogram lifter. It just doesn't make sense. Like, they need more muscle mass, more frame, because they're going to be competing against guys that are shorter but weigh the same amount, so they just have more muscle mass. They're going to get out competed. They're just going to get beaten by people that have more muscle. So if you are someone that's 6 foot, you need to be competing more as a 96, probably looking at more like a 109 and above. So it's just something to really be thinking about. Bodybuilding work is also useful for rehabbing and preventing injuries. So this is something that seems to be really overlooked, especially in weightlifting, where a lot of recreational lifters or non-elite lifters don't tend to take a specific off-season, and it's something that we really need to start considering. So if we think about, I'm just going to look at some of my notes up here, we've got like building muscle around the joints, like your elbow and shoulder joint is really good from an injury prevention standpoint for elbow injuries. And then we know that off-season periods with more focused bodybuilding style training can allow a much needed break for your body's joints, connective tissues. So that's really good stuff to do. We know from research, there's a great paper by Lorenz and Raymond in 2011 showing that if you're trying to rehab injuries, that slow eccentrics can be used for the treatment of tendinopathies, ACL damage, and hamstring strains. So really good reasons to incorporate slow eccentrics, bodybuilding style training into your kind of weightlifting program at least a couple of times a year. And last but not least, we have aesthetics, looking like you lift, Let's be honest, 95% of weightlifters in the Western world, they're not getting paid to lift. They're not making any money from this. It's just a recreational thing they're doing. It's just for fun. They're not looking to compete on the world stage or at the Olympics. We are literally just doing this for enjoyment. So if you want to look like you lift, if you want to feel a bit more confident, fill out those shirts a little bit, that's a really good reason to do so, So bodybuilding can be really useful for that, just to actually look like you lift, as well as being pretty strong. So what's the deal then? If we know that bodybuilding training can have various benefits for weightlifters, why hasn't it been used? And I think it really boils down, there's a lot of reasons. Some of them are evidence-led, some of them are more tradition-driven and need to be challenged. So let's just break down some of those main ones. Whilst adding muscle is definitely good for strength for the most part, it isn't quite that simple, and there are some muscle architectural factors that we have to consider. So if I look at my notes, we've got things like pennation angle, fascicle length, they're related to strength output, and the degree to which these interact is still unknown. So if we look at the literature, the studies by Amer in 2016, Sofa in 2017, and it's still quite undecided the impact that they have. So that's another consideration that coaches have to make when they're deciding these things. We also know that when looking at bodybuilding work, that you can effectively achieve hypertrophy at rep ranges anything from 5 reps up to 30 reps, which is a huge range for effective hypertrophy training. The problem from a more weightlifting perspective, though, is that if you're training with sets of 20, 25, 30 reps, that you might see some adaptations that aren't favorable from a weightlifting perspective. So again, looking at my notes, if you're thinking about developing slower twitch fibers, reducing your overall rate of force development in favor of endurance qualities, then that's going to go against your goals of lifting a really heavy weight, a maximal weight, as fast as possible. So again, something else to consider. Another issue, and this is a broader tradition, cultural kind of issue in Western countries, is that for the longest time we've been trying to play catch up to a lot of the other countries. So a lot of our methodology, our programming has been taken from places like the Soviet Union, from old Russian texts. We've borrowed piecemeal from sort of Bulgarian style training programs and tried to implement that over the years. So what we've essentially been trying to do is we've been trying to take programming principles from countries that have heavily used and abused performance enhancing drugs. And what that means is that fundamentally, these are countries that build muscle easier. So if I'm an athlete that is taking significant amounts of steroids, chances are I don't need to do the same amount of bodybuilding and assistance work to build muscle, because I have something that's going to really enhance that process and do a lot of that for me. So I don't have to worry about that. But if I'm a natural lifter, if I'm not using those things, then I'm probably going to have to dedicate a lot more time towards building that muscle and building that strength and building that base that I might not have had to do in another system. So I think maybe some of our programming background and the sources that we're drawing our information from have impacted how we look at bodybuilding training for the worse. And lastly, there's a bit of purism or elitism, I guess is the best way to describe it, in the weightlifting world. And that some people identify so hard as being, I'm a weightlifter, you know, I lift weights, I lift maximal weights, I don't do that bodybuilding crap. So they draw these these distinctions that don't really exist. So I think a lot of people and a lot of coaches as well, a lot of quite traditional coaches, they don't like their athletes doing a lot of this bodybuilding style work. And it's something that I've encountered quite a lot amongst coaches in the UK. I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's probably similar for a lot of Western countries. I think CrossFit is doing a lot to change this and maybe opening people's minds about the idea of general physical preparedness, and that not everything has to be super weightlifting specific, and that maybe it can even be better from a long-term development standpoint. But this is still taking time to go. You know, weightlifting is quite a slow-moving sport, so we're only just starting to adapt these things and to adopt these things. But I think over time we're going to start to see that change. All right, so I've somewhat convinced you. You want to give this bodybuilding sort of stuff a go, integrate it in your program a bit more effectively. How do you do it? What are some practical recommendations? Well, first off, the first thing you need to consider is when you time that bodybuilding work. So worst possible way of doing it is right next to your competition, you know? You don't want to be warming up in the back room, smashing some curls out, and then go out for your opener. It's a really shit way of integrating your bodybuilding work, okay? So you think bodybuilding is going to be in a general physical preparedness block. So if your competition is here, then maybe 12, 16 weeks beforehand, you can have a bodybuilding focused block, and then you can sort of cycle that so it becomes less and less and less until it's mainly out of the program, ready for the specific training for the competition. Next up, you're going to want to pick bodybuilding exercises that focus predominantly on the muscles that you use for the sport of weightlifting, okay? So you're thinking quads, hamstrings, glutes, lower back, erectors, lats, traps, shoulders, all these kind of muscles, right? You can absolutely put in some amount of work for, you know, side delts. You know, I've totally done that myself in the past and enjoyed it. You know, it's good fun, just get some beach muscle work. But you want the main bulk of your bodybuilding work to support your weightlifting, and then maybe sprinkle on just some extras for sort of chest, you know, biceps, triceps, that kind of work, just as added extras in and around the mainstay of what you're doing. I would also say aim to keep your sets generally to 10 reps or less, give or take. I've experimented with this myself. I've had athletes try it out. I've also read a lot of literature around this. So I've got to say from experience, from what I've found, is that sets of, you know, 15, 20, 25 reps, they don't really have a great carryover to your weightlifting movements. I don't think they're going to be close enough to, in specificity terms, to really carry over. So try and go for those sets of less than 10 reps, and I think that's going to have the biggest bang for your buck. And then last up, think about the exercise order within your individual sessions. So you're going to want to put bodybuilding work closer towards the end of the workout, after you've done your more complex exercises, snatches, cleans, or your harder strength exercises, squats or pulls or anything like that. You really don't want to start your workout off by slamming a bunch of bodybuilding exercises, destroying your triceps, for instance, and then trying to catch heavy weights overhead, because that's a recipe for disaster. So just think about using nice, practical, sensible ways of organizing your bodybuilding work within a session. And that is pretty much it for today. Hopefully I've given you some incentive to go out and put some bodybuilding work into your weightlifting program. And hopefully I've given you enough practical recommendations and tips so that you can include that without too many issues. If you do have any questions, comments, any suggestions for content that you'd want to see, feel free to pop them down in the comment section below, and I'll get back to them as soon as possible. Catch you in the next one.